Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Good to be
All right.
with you again.
Pleased to have you, Robert. How's the weather?
The weather is moderated. It's pretty nice now.
Okay. Is that around zero or something, is it?
Yeah, just slightly above.
Okay.
That's tolerable. It was melting a bit today. We've got quite a bit of snow though. We must have about I don't know 3 feet of snow everywhere now. And when you come to an intersection, it's sometimes hard to see if cars are coming because you can't see over the snow the way it's
Right.
banked up.
That's
A little
incredible.
bit dangerous.
I once went on a drive, a 500 mile or 600-mile drive to go and see the snow in the high country, and it was 4 foot deep and it only just fallen. And it
Hmm.
was the only one and only time that I've actually seen snow to touch and lick and smell and kiss. And I went into the chalet area, drove through the chalet area, and it was actually snowing. It was for me, such a wonderful thing. But at the same time, I go into the desert and it's nearly 45 degrees plus and all that. So it's such a variability.
Well, I get the
Okay.
impression when it snows that the earth is being purified or something because this absolutely beautiful white stuff
It
falls
is.
down and covers everything.
It is.
That's-
It's a lovely thing. I think the same of rain. Yeah, that's it. Okay, and Wallace Clink. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, Arnie. I like the white stuff, but I don't like low temperatures that sometimes go with it.
Hmm.
We have temperatures here now that have been a little colder than Bob's. It's been around minus 10, 12 at night,
Hmm.
and but it's supposed to get up to the plus 4 or maybe more next week. So
Mm.
it's not bad.
Okay. Well, we've got a maximum around the mid to high 20s, and I must admit, in the mornings, my bones ache from the cold, and I don't know that you would understand my cold and your cold,
Go.
because my cold might be 15 degrees or 18 degrees plus, and and you're
Well,
about
these
minus 18. It's incredible. Mm.
This is one of those brilliant days. The sun is very bright, and we had a snow squall just a little while ago, and it was really quite beautiful. Big flakes floating down in the bright sunlight, and the
Hmm.
light reflecting off the flakes as
Hmm.
they were falling. It was just brief, but it was very pretty when it happened. Anyway, that's the way things are here in Canada right now, in this part of their country.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's excellent and pleased to hear. Okay, well, Wallace, yes, you did bring the subject up today, credit, sacred and profane, and sacred being holy or something I would consider within a religious context as holy, and profane being something that is more secular and not necessarily religious. So credit, sacred and profane. Wally, you've got the floor.
Well, that's very sudden. I'm not sure what to say. Anyway, we'll have to work through this. It's a rather spontaneous discussion today.
Hmm.
And I think, social credit talks of credit as being real, meaning our ability to actually accomplish things, and financial, which is the means that we can activate our real credit because we operate on a financial basis. We don't just, it's not a question of ordinary trade as it was in primitive times. We have a representational system of money that we use to conduct our commercial activities.
Hmm.
So there is a clear distinction there. And well, what we do in life can be directed to very high purpose, or it can be directed to very destructive ends.
Hmm.
And I think that the way our financial system controls our real credit is very important to study and to understand because we can learn how to use the financial system to direct our economic activities in a way that is on a high level and rather than a base level. In other words, we can use it to create wonderful things and a wonderful life for people, or we can use it to accomplish things like war and destruction.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a very interesting opening salvo, Wallace. And I noticed in that you used the term real credit. And to me, real credit are the natural resources or the things that we actually are able to utilize in our world. We use the sun, solar energy, for doing all sorts of things. In actual fact, a lot of our stored hydrocarbons are a consequence of solar energy. And of course, the sun gives us the weather, which is the rain, the air circulation, things like that. And the other natural resources or natural credit that we have, or the real credit that we have, of course, is the soil, from which we get not only the minerals but also the life forces in our food. So they're only the base, the most rudimentary of the real credit. And of course, then on top of that, you've got the technology, if you like, the ability to harness not only energy but also the minerals and of course the gases and all the other things, and to a point of quite a high level of sophistication, modern technology today. Anyway, Robert Klinck, your thoughts?
Well, the word credit means belief.
Mhm.
And therefore, if you're talking about credit, sacred and profane, I would say that you're talking about belief that is fundamental, tied to reality, and belief that is artificially generated in the population. And the artificial generation of belief in the population is a really big business these days.
Mhm.
All you have to do is look at a TV schedule, a list of programs on TV, and you would say, how could it possibly be that this kind of material is being produced to become the focus of human attention?
Mhm.
Uh, now, sacred credit, I think, would pertain to uh, the essence of the universe and the rules that govern the universe, and the effort to divert people's attention to the profane sort of credit, the superficial kind, is taking them away from thought about larger issues like uh, the fundamental nature of the universe. All you have to do is think for a few minutes, and you'll realize that the universe operates according to laws. You know, physicists know this, chemists know it because they study those things. But the education system that we have now doesn't instill that idea in people. So they're taken up with trivia and just these distractions in life. So their credit goes to superficial issues,
Mhm.
whereas the sacred credit, the belief, would be concerned with ascertaining how the universe works and understanding it with the purpose in mind of maximizing the benefits from that understanding.
Mm.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful analogy, the illustration, a visual illustration, verbal visual illustration you've just given us, Robert. I sort of in my mind's eye saw a sailing boat, and here it was that you're attempting to harness the the wind, and you're attempting to harness the tides and the waves and the shape of the waves and everything else that goes with it. And of course, the closer you come to that ideal of optimizing all those observations and natural laws, in a sense, is reflected in the success of sailing or anything like that. And to me, it's no different in a mechanical or an agricultural or a societal perspective. That we look at the nature of people, we look at how they actually get on and how they can have a mutual love and cooperation, can actually work together to achieve the results they desire, the community's credit. Wallace Klinck.
Yes, as Bob said, the term credit comes from the Latin word credo or credere. And if you have a good basis of belief, you have a high credit.
Mm-hmm.
Your credit can be related to your character, your reliability in carrying out a contract, a promise, an action that you have contracted to fulfill,
Hmm.
and your physical ability, both your psychological and moral intent to carry it out. That is the first importance of all. And then you have to have your physical attributes or abilities or resources in order to carry it out. And if you can do this, you have established your good credit.
Hmm.
And that's what society really is based on. If it's going to be successful, it is good credit. So there's that. Now, the thing of it is, when we associate, you mentioned association, we get results and we get increments from those associations, increments which build up. We accumulate them. We don't just throw them away. We develop knowledge, experience, expertise, and that sort of thing, which allows us to build up our real credit, our ability to deliver.
Hmm.
This is the way we function as a society historically. So it's very important that we give due regard to this issue because it's the whole basis of civilization, really.
Mm.
And if you don't guard it, if you don't preserve it and enhance it, you are going to suffer as a society and as a civilization. So this is the important aspect of credit.
Mm.
And I just wanted to make that point very clearly. The
Yep.
problem is when we do things, when we associate, the desirability of our association is measured by the results that flow from that association. Now we have to look into our motivations for action and for association. Are those motivations real or are they artificial? We know that under our present system, we are driven, and Douglas brought this out in his early article, The Delusion of Superproduction.
Mm.
He predicted that we would be driven into a frenzy, an increasing frenzy of production. Not a production motivated or driven by real factors, but by artificial factors, primarily a deficiency or a defect in the financial system, which makes it so that we cannot acquire what we produce today before we acquire additional money by further activity so that we can acquire what we have produced in the past or today.
Yeah.
So you see, we are being driven by a monetary necessity rather than what we would choose normally just to do. And that, because it's the fundamental defect that it becomes accentuated and it becomes worse as you modernize your economy, because the driving force that causes us to be engaged in artificial activities becomes greater and greater because of the entry into prices of a factor other than labor. And so you're driven more and more and more into activities which you wouldn't necessarily freely choose to do
Hmm.
if you were just able to make that choice.
Mm. I think the observation, I think it was last week, we made a point in the 1950s. A man, one working member of the family, had a sufficient income to provide a home for the family and support them, and perhaps a new car every few years. Now, in the 1950s, of course, that was 5, 10 years after the end of the war. And the fact is that that period of time of such huge production and destruction of that production actually increased the living standards of those people who weren't in living through the war in their own nation. And so America, as an example, the standard of living went right up. But since then, of course, it's come down, and yet the demonstration of the actual capacity to produce by the American, if you like, war machine was quite profound, and it was certainly capable of providing a huge, high standard of living for the American people, and it did.
Right.
But it also provided the machinery of war, which was surplus production that was being delivered to another country. Now, if you look at it like that, you realize that, hang on, this production thing, we actually do have nailed it. We have methods to produce more than we need, more and more that we need, but we don't have access to it. Poverty amidst plenty. Credit, sacred and profane. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck.
Well, Wally was talking about choice, and this gets down to the fundamentals that I was speaking of in our appreciation of what the universe is about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we come from a Christian heritage, and there is no doubt that choice was fundamental to every message that Christ expressed. He said, "Why don't you judge for yourselves?" When he was performing miracles, he said, "You are healed as a result of your faith." Your faith. It wasn't that I'm just going to step in here and fix you against your will. It was always the outworking of the individual's choice
Mm-hmm.
that led to the result. So when we're talking about credit, it's sacred when it is enhancing our ability to choose. And our ability to choose is synonymous with freedom.
Mm.
So if we're going to look at sacred credit, it will invariably involve the extension of our freedom, the taking away of limitations upon us. And these limitations can be physical, or they can be political, they can be economic. But for our belief to be sacred, we must constantly be directing it toward the freeing of individuals so that they can pursue their own interests with their own abilities. There is a very strong movement among academics today to deny the very existence of free will. And they inculcate this in students. It's a dreadful thing. And it contains an inherent contradiction, because they're up there teaching people what they contend to be truth, but they're saying there is no truth, because every thought we have is just derived from experiences we've had, and we cannot function independently of that. So it's essential that this concept of belief that supports the extension of freedom be taught to counteract the disastrous effects of this denial of the existence of the capacity to think freely and to make valid judgments by individuals.
Beautifully put. I actually saw an illustration, and I'm going to bring it up, so I'm going to lose your audio, fellas, just for a sec. And the illustration was from a work by Ivor Benson. It's very, very important that we consider the illustration here, because in it, Ivor's talking about the age of conflict, and part two, the source and technology of illegitimate power. And where in this left-hand area, we talk about the religion, we talk about the economics, mass media. These are all areas of influence, or if you like, attack against the idea of freedom. Even our history, our sciences, our culture, foreign policy, all these things are actually turned against us, and it's quite deliberate that the forces attempting to influence the narrative are attacking all these areas simultaneously. I find it frustrating that I read Ivor's booklet, and he mentions that we're essentially in a state of civil war against ourselves. Our universities, our teachers, as you point, are teaching a foreign philosophy. They're teaching if you like, humanism, and it is foreign because there is no boundaries, just man. and as far as man's intellect goes. And this is the very opposite of the concept that the world, we try and look for the laws, we try and look for natural observable laws and then adhere to them. I mean, law of gravity, law of thermodynamics, managing heat, internal combustion engines and boilers and industry. You can't manage any of those without managing heat. It's a natural law, and we have to observe it and enhance our understanding of it in order to harness it. So, to me, the idea of denying the sacred, if you like, of a design, if you like, a purpose behind our very existence and the world that we live in. Yes, it is profane. It is anti sacred. Your thoughts, Wally?
Yes, well, of course, if you attempt to reduce things to a material level, yeah, you're also, in effect, reducing everything to a struggle for power.
Hmm.
And a struggle for power is an attempt to impose your will upon other people. Now, this is quite contrary to freedom, because freedom is where the individual is able to explore, to wander, to imagine, to really become as a human being in the highest sense, in the sacred sense, if you want.
Hmm.
If you are nothing more than matter and motion, then you are just part of the profane world, and you are subject to those who have more strength than you have.
Mm.
Now, the problem with this more recent accelerated movement that's been going on is it's really been quite censorious, restrictive, and condemnatory of human beings in their freedom of movement, expression, and so on. And, if you really truly believe in freedom of expression, you believe in it not for yourself only, but for everyone else too.
Hmm.
In other words, it's an expression of love, if you want, because it's respectful of other people. Freedom, viewed from a purely profane perspective, is just it's just a nightmare. It's just a big scramble for power.
Hmm.
And that's not what we want. We want people to be free to really explore life and become closer to an understanding of the universe in which we live and the principles which govern it. And that's what we feel is really the meaning of life. Otherwise, really, what real meaning is there to life
Yeah,
if you don't have freedom?
that's right. I was looking in one of our forums. We were discussing the function of government, and one of the things I said was that its function, a principal function, is to uphold the law, not administer the law, but uphold the common law, what we consider to be acceptable behaviour between people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're free to operate and do whatever you like as long as you stay within the boundaries of what is legitimate law between peoples. And that means you can travel, you can think, you can speak, you can do whatever by the government providing that environment and serving the individual, and in serving the individual providing the environment for the individual to find expression and freedom of what they choose to do. Then the government's function is legitimized. It becomes sacred. But when it's one of power over the people, then yes, it is profane. It certainly is, because it's one of this thing of domination. And so it's moved away from sacred, and it's gone into domination and one of exercising power over the entire population. And of course, this to me finds expression in the parades that we see behind the Iron Curtain or in China. The parades aren't of their culture. They're not of their art. They're of weapons. Weapons. In other words, it's a threat to not only the whole world, but also to the internal population of that country. If you play up, if you do the wrong thing, we have it, and we will sort you out. And that to me is not, there's nothing sacred about that. It's quite frustrating because it's just simply one of violence and power against their own people. Robert Klinck, your thoughts?
It is surely a sacred belief that has led to all our technological progress, because it has resulted from a sort of humility on the part of the people who developed that technology. They believed that by understanding reality, they could advance the opportunities that people have for a better life. And it has struck me recently how a lot of these young, social justice warriors who are out just to challenge the system, attack the system, have probably no comprehension whatsoever of the technology and what lies behind that technology that sustains the life that they benefit from. Mm-hmm. I'm sure, they're driving cars. Do they understand the history of the evolution of the car? Do they understand, all the aspects of electrical advances and of metallurgy? But they're attacking society in such a way that it would reverse all its progress. It's a frightful thing, because they don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand what sustains the life we have. And it is supported by people who do have that knowledge and are constantly developing technology that gives us new benefits. So this power, this force that's been unleashed of these young people, Antifa and things like that just want to tear down existing structures, is preposterous to my way of thinking, because they have no clue about what they're contending with and what their the effect of their destructive activities is going to be.
Yeah, I think of just something as simple as a watch, and you think about the intricate initial designs of cogs and springs and things like that in order to meter time, and then with the oscillation of crystals, and then of course with electronics, and nowadays of course you've got combinations of all of those in order to meter time down to the speed of light and traveling and how long it takes and things like that. It's a measurable consideration down to the smallest degree. And this is where, if you like, the evolution of thinking, the evolution of our development, the evolution of our sciences goes. But what point is it in the sense of, okay, we're able to do that with time, but what point, what purpose behind it? What purpose behind understanding time? Surely it's got to be, well, a consideration of what is an acceptable amount of time doing this or doing that. Even time itself needs to have an ethical consideration, because time is, well, what are we doing? The time that we put into this, is there an ethical position to it? I think these are all fascinating considerations, and I don't know that I've made it particularly clear, but to me it's important. If I have this time and I have this spare time, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to be constructive or destructive? We're at 29-minute mark. I'm going to call for summary and closing comments. Wally Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, I think it is blind rebellion. Blind rebellion for the sake of rebellion. They have been taught that the system has created problems, which it has, but they haven't been grounded in the benefits. I'm talking about the students and young people. Some of them were interviewed just recently. They were interviewed, and we have an organic example of what's going on in Canada right now, because we are, quite involved in the energy sector of the economy. And our economy is being literally stymied. It's being frozen by all of these protests that are taking place. Now, I know that an interviewer was asking a number of these young people why they were doing this and what their motivation was. And they were asked, with regard to specific projects, what it was that was being, what area of the economy, what products were involved. They didn't know. They didn't have a clue. They were just there to protest. You see, it's based on a false moralizing, not on realities. They're not people who are qualified to make decisions like that because they just don't have the knowledge.
Yeah.
And yet they have the presumption that they should be able to dictate what goes on within the economy instead of producers assessing the situation and determining whether or not consumers have a real desire or need for things and letting a business succeed or fall to the degree that it delivers actual satisfaction to consumers at large. They want to stand above it all and make decrees and dictates as to what should or should not be done.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they are literally destroying the productive capacity or ability of the economy to perform. I think it's a mistaken concept. They seem to have that idea that they are somehow divinely ordained to make decisions for the rest of people. This is not freedom. This is tyranny.
Yeah.
But they are told that they are rebelling against some terrible oppressive regime.
The time that they're spending rebelling, I think, is interesting to observe. Who gave them the time in the first place, and what keeps food in their bellies and clothes on their back and warmth from the oppressive environment that they live in. All these sorts of things, and I think it's a very short-sighted perspective. But in my view, greater wrong is being done by these institutions that are actually indoctrinating these young people. And even worse still is the powers that be, the political powers that be, that actually appoint the structures, that appoint the professorships and the guardians of our learning institutions and our seminaries. You start going up the food chain on this and you realise that there's iniquity in high places, and it's quite deliberate. Now, I'm just going to cut across, before I call for closing comments, Robert, I'm just going to cut across to our website and just touch on a couple of things. Firstly, the Ivor Benson is here in our website under B for Benson. There he is, This Age of Conflict. But I also wanted to point out Mayer W.E., Brainwashing the Ultimate Weapon. To me, they're two very important documents in our library that help understand that these things are not happening accidentally. They're quite deliberate, they're intentional, they're malevolent. Your closing thoughts and comments, Robert Klinck, please.
Well, I agree about the malevolence, and I would say that it springs from the financial system and the people who control money, because the shape of our society is determined by what they license, and they're licensing all this conflict and disruption. So that's very interesting, and they are inculcating in people, in young people particularly, a narcissism that limits their perspective. You know, if their belief is that somehow they understand without, you know, a lifetime of study, and even then it wouldn't be adequate probably to justify the stands they take, then well, this is, as I say, an expression of a profane belief, and it is a restrictive and limiting thing. If they stopped looking at themselves and started to look at the wider considerations, in particular, as I was mentioning earlier, the laws that obviously govern the operation of things, with the idea that they could study these and with humility come to understand them and to use them for the benefit of other people, rather than thinking that by shutting everything down they're going to accomplish anything positive, then they would not only widen their thinking, improve their thinking, but they would also meet all their fellow men in this fantastic field of the laws of the universe. This is what we swim in, and this is the proper study of humanity. And all humans have a common interest in advancing their understanding of this. So it makes us all fellows in a joint enterprise to understand how things operate and to have institutions and technology that apply that knowledge to make life better for everyone.
Yeah.
It's a great enterprise for people to be involved in,
It certainly
rather
is.
than demonstrating and all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's having it. It almost seems like yesterday when I was young and rebellious and all those sorts of inherent flaws that are in. And I must admit, over the last, it's probably 30 years of learning and continuing to learn, and I've never read as much as I'm reading now to realize how little I do know. And I certainly haven't come to an end position on anything. The more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And it's there's no lesson, there's no separation between the lessons of life between the young and the not so young. It's the same lessons, it's the same rules. And the more that's there, the more in front of us, the more we realize that things are sacred. Even the food that we eat, sacred. If we look at it and how it's grown and how you might be turning towards alternative lifestyles or anything like that, and you're adhering to the natural laws of the universe. Beautifully put. Excellent subject for today. Certainly didn't go where I expected, but it's been really interesting. Credit, sacred, and profane. Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you, Arnie. It's I'm very grateful for you giving us an opportunity to engage in these exchanges.
No worries. All right. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.